Well, I'd like to welcome you to this short video. My name is Phil Jump. I'm the NWBA Regional Minister, and I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend of mine, Geoff Colmer. Geoff, thank you for talking to us today. Geoff, you are the Baptist Union President. And I guess for many people in our NWBA community, we may not really know what a Baptist Union president is. So this is an interesting opportunity to find out a bit more about that. But maybe we should start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself, Geoff. You and I go back a long way, but lots of people won't know you up here. You are kind of from the south of the country, though you spent a fair bit of your time in Leeds, I know. So tell us a bit about yourself, first of all.
I was born in Barking, Essex, so I have a bit of a crisis of identity as to whether I'm an East Londoner or I'm Essex man. But I grew up there, and I guess the passion in my life as a young person was music. And I started off by playing the recorder, then the clarinet, but I ended up playing the bassoon and discovered that I played it quite well. So at about the age, I think it was 13, I went to the Royal College of Music on a Saturday morning as a junior exhibition, and that's the way they describe it. It was fantastic. I was relating to somebody the other day that I don't think I ever paid for a music lesson. Everything was provided. They even provided me with an instrument within the London Borough of Barking. So I was part of that generation that was hugely privileged. And then
if I just interrupt you for a moment, I mean, I guess there may be some people, I know it's a terrible thing to say, but don't quite know what a bassoon is.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
we probably need, it's that sort of very long instrument, isn't it? That kind of came to fame in Ivor the Engine, I think.
Ivor the Engine is, for those of a certain age, and even Hector's House.
Yep.
There are lots of theme tunes that use the more comic side of the bassoon. The Sorcerer's Apprentice. If you remember Disney's Fantasia, I could give you, I could give you lots of examples. I feel a bit touchy on this one because the bassoon is more than the clown of the orchestra, and is capable of playing very beautiful lyrical lines. But anyway, so I played the bassoon. When I was 18, I went to the Royal College of Music full time as a student. And I was there for 4 years, but by the end of my time there, I wasn't there very much because I was freelancing. And when I left, I thought I was going to go up to Scotland to play in the Orchestra of Opera North, but I then got offered a job in Leeds at Opera North, and so I played with the English Northern Philharmonia for 7 years, and that was a really special time. It was during that time that my faith, which was very real in my early teens, but had it'd gone to sleep really. That was reawakened, and out of that, there was a call to ministry. I feel really privileged because I feel as though I've had two vocations: a vocation as a musician, and also a vocation as a minister. And although my experience as a musician was a very long time ago now, in some ways it doesn't seem that long ago. And I guess I continue to live as a musician. I've got, that's in my head. It's not something that I can just put to one side and say, well, that was then. It's still very much now. So I was at Moortown Baptist Church in Leeds, and that was the sending church. Went to Spurgeon's College, and that's where we met. We might have met actually the summer before you came to Spurgeon's College, because you might want to tell the story of that, Phil.
Well, I was going to say that because, of course, your two vocations, so to speak, came together in this one rather big event in Glasgow, which actually was quite instrumental in my sense of call to college. So yeah, maybe it might be good even for our own sakes, because you were given this task of sort of, well, I thought it was pretty good, to be honest, Geoff, when I experienced it. But you were given this task of creating an orchestra, basically, from young Baptists, I think.
We were, and we went all over the country. We did 5 days of auditions. We came up to Manchester, we did Bristol, we did London, we did Scotland as well. And we put together an orchestra of about 50 players, all were grade 8 plus. And when we came to this event, and I think there must have been about, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, 11, 12,000 young people there.
It was a big gig, yeah.
It was a big gig, and the orchestra was on the stage, and every member of the orchestra had a microphone, so they were amplified. But the real issue is we were not the star attraction, because the star attraction was Graham Kendrick and his band. So we accompanied the band, but musically it was, I mean, I still think it was a glorious occasion. Each evening, you might remember, Phil, each evening began with this sort of, it came up, I mean, for me it was I really enjoyed it, but it was a bit cheesy, because I had a sort of a screen down by my feet, and I'd get the go ahead, and I'd sort of point my baton at the timpanist, and he'd sort of start the roll, and then we'd have this fanfare by the trumpets, and at that point Graham Kendrick would come in, and he'd sort of strike up "Shine Jesus Shine" with the full orchestra. We had a great brass section, players that he then used at Spring Harvest and the like, and on the screen it would be "Jesus Christ Rules," and there'd be a particular, you know, the world, the individual, you know, all that sort of stuff. It was good, but it was massive energy and a lot of fun. And can I just say that the thing that struck me about that is the number of people I've met through my life for whom that BWA Congress was literally life-changing, including you, because that's where you had a ministry. Yeah. So.
And strangely enough, I mean, I actually met one of your trombone players several years later. We were at Spring Harvest, ironically, and he was in Graham Kendrick's band. And it was when we were actually expecting our first daughter, Laura, and Jan was quite unwell with morning sickness. And so I think he'd hurt himself playing the trombone, and I was trying to get some help for Jan. So that's yeah, we met up in the most normal of human circumstances. But yeah, I was going to say, Geoff, you did somewhat immortalize "Shine Jesus Shine" for all Baptists of a certain age. Charles.
And the thing about that is, when people go, "Oh, shine Jesus shine," and they're really rude about it, I still feel quite protective about it. And don't knock that song.
Don't knock my song. Yeah, that's great. So, Geoff, I mean, you then went on into a journey in ministry. I think you were at Rye Baptist Church for a while. Then you eventually found yourself as a regional minister.
I went to Milton Mowbray.
You went to that's I'd forgotten. Yeah, which of course is famous for its pork pies.
Yeah. If you ever come to a meeting at our house, you always have Milton Mowbray pork pie for lunch. So remember that, all right?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it already, although I quite like the Marks and Spencer's ones with chutney on top. But anyway, Geoff, so tell us now, I mean, Baptist Union President, some people will be very familiar with that role. Others possibly have never heard of it. So, I mean, what is it what is it you've been called to do, and why is it that you particularly accepted that invitation?
Well, it wasn't something that I aspired to or even thought would come my way, but a close friend suggested this, and I thought, first of all, I thought it was a bit ridiculous, but I did say that I would consider it and pray about it, and I took it to my spiritual director, and I went through a process of discernment about it, and I thought, I think I will allow my name to go forward for this. I think partly because I felt I had something to say. I mean, the role of the president is as a communicator of the union's vision and their mission. And historically, the president would travel around the union, engaging with churches and associations and colleges. For the president last year, Yinka, that was very difficult in COVID, and he needed to find other ways of doing that. And I'm still not sure how it's going to work out for us, because, you know, COVID is not over yet. But the president also offers, there are occasions when the president represents the union as a sort of a focus for unity for the union, and that's at various civic and ecumenical events. But I think for me, the thing about the presidency was it gave me an opportunity to say some things that I feel deeply about and energized about. So that's why I allowed my name to go forward, and I was elected. And must have been last April, I became the vice president, and now I am the president.
Yeah.
Although off to a slow start, as we'll hear in a minute.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm glad you kind of took us to that, because one of the reasons I was keen to talk to you is because it does feel to me as if a lot of the kind of theme that you've been bringing to us. I mean, I guess you kind of accepted this nomination before any of us realized COVID was coming our way.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it does feel to me as if there is a particular, should we say, relevance to your message where we are. And I'm, just to let people know, we're kind of having this conversation just about as we're about to come out of lockdown on what I think has been quite unhelpfully called Freedom Day. And I think we've come to recognize it's not at all going to be straightforward. And I think, so I'm really interested that you tell us a bit about some of those themes that you want to bring, because I do think they have a lot to say to us as we try and face this next stage of our journey, so to speak.
Well, my theme is attentive to rhythms of grace. And can I tell you the story about this, Phil?
Yeah, please do.
It's captured by an experience that happened at the start of 2015. I'm not an enthusiast. I'm not particularly enthusiastic bird watcher, but I've got a bit of an interest. And that year, I wanted to see a kingfisher. I'd never seen one before. And I even considered contacting the Buckinghamshire Bird Society to ask where I might go to catch a sighting. Well, on the 2nd of January, Kaz, my wife, and I were walking in the parkland right next to where we live, when along the brook, I saw a bird hurtling towards us. And as it passed, I turned and the light caught its fluorescent blue and orange colouring, and it was a kingfisher. There's a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins which begins, "As kingfishers catch fire." And this was exactly my experience. So it was a gift. It was a moment of grace. And the thing about it was that it, more than anything, it changed the way that I walk in the parkland, because since that time, I've found that I'm always watching for the kingfisher. Now, I don't see it frequently. And when I do, invariably it takes me by surprise. It's not as though I'm walking along, oh, there's a kingfisher. It's more, wow, what was that? It always takes me by surprise. It always comes as a gift and as a moment of grace. But the kingfisher is never far away from my attention. And it struck me that this is a beautiful picture of how we might live, watching for God and looking for God and noticing God and being, to get to the theme again, attentive to rhythms of grace. And the thing is, I didn't pluck this idea out of the air. It came out of that experience, but also it expresses what I've longed for in the whole of life and ministry. The fascinating thing is, of course, I didn't know what was coming ahead with COVID, and the theme seems particularly appropriate in the light of that. And I have to say, in the light of my personal experience since being elected.
Yeah, because I was going to sort of go on to that, many of us will obviously recognize your presidency has coincided with COVID. I must admit, the more I talk to you, Geoff, the more scary it gets, because I realize we have so much in common. Because I also had a childhood longing to see a kingfisher. My dad used to have the Observer's Book of Birds, which I used to look through quite. And the only colour, this is back in the day, the only colour picture in it was the picture of the kingfisher. All the rest were in black and white. And I so desperately, and I saw one actually near Blackburn on the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, about the same time, I think, as you must have seen yours. But yeah, let's sort of go back to you for a minute, because COVID has come along, but for you being president, you've accepted this nomination, but then you also received some personal news that really totally changed, I guess, your perception of what the next couple of years might have in store for you.
Well, I don't want to be over dramatic, but it did rather change my life, because in June I started getting very bad backache, and I went to a physio and saw her for a couple of appointments, and then she said, you need to see a back specialist, and the pain was really intense. So I arranged to see one and arranged for an MRI. And when I came out of the MRI, they said, you need to go straight to accident and emergency. And so I went to the Milton Keynes University Hospital, and it appeared that I had multiple compression fractures to my ribs and my spine. well, in one sense, that was bad enough, but the concern was how this had come about, because there'd not been any trauma. I hadn't fallen over or had an accident or anything like that. I hadn't been engaging in extreme sports. It was just very odd. So they did some further tests, and as a result, found out that I had myeloma, which is a blood cancer. So I was in hospital. I should have been in hospital for probably 2-3 weeks. But when the specialist back hospital in North London looked at the MRI, they said I needed a specially constructed back and neck brace. So that had to be made. So I was in hospital for 6 weeks last summer, and that's when I began chemo as well. I mean, the condition is it's incurable, but it is highly treatable. So I began chemotherapy, which was daily and weekly, of course, and that finished at the end of end of November. And the back brace came off at the beginning of November, which was fantastic, because I looked like something out of a Star Wars film. You know, all I needed was the helmet, and I looked like a stormtrooper. But actually the back brace was wonderful. It did its business, and my back is healed, and the chemo's done its work, because I'm now in remission for that. But that was all a prelude to then going into hospital during this year and having a stem cell transplant, which was delayed because of COVID, and that happened in April, and I was off work for 3 months with that. That's just the way it goes with that. But the theme, of course, had a different resonance for me, because all of a sudden I was finding that I was needing to watch for the kingfisher, to be attentive to rhythms of grace, in this very different world to the one that I'd imagined. And so that's been quite a journey, because it's been painful. But my experience, I know this isn't everybody's experience. My experience is that God's been very close through that, and there have been many occasions which are, I've counted as precious and even beautiful. As I say, I know that that's not everybody's experience of pain and suffering, but that's been mine. So I now find myself in a relatively good place. I saw the consultant a couple of weeks ago, and they'll keep an eye on me, and I ought to have, after this stem cell transplant, a long remission. How long is, we just have to wait and see, and then there'll be further treatment in due course. But I am in a place now where I'm able to to engage with the presidency. But I've got this this personal history that I carry with me, and of course I've also got the history of COVID, which I talked about my condition changing my life. COVID has changed all of our lives, and we're at this point. You're reluctant to talk about Freedom Day, and I think that's right, Phil, because COVID is not going away, and it's how we actually how we navigate our life together as churches in the light of it.
Mm-hmm. I think, you've taken us very helpfully forward there, because we are all different people, and I'm sure that there are some people listening to your story who will have very similar stories and will find enormous help from hearing the way you've talked about that. But of course, there'll be many people listening to this conversation who aren't particularly passionate about seeing kingfishers, who haven't been through the kind of situation that you've been through. What do you think this theme, Rhythms of Grace, says into the lives of our churches as we look to the future, and as we simply explore who we are as God's people? What difference do you want to see this theme making to the life of local churches?
Well, I think we're all asking pretty searching questions as to the future, and there have been some very helpful voices on the way. Simon Barrington, he's spoken on the subject of recovery out of his experience of international relief and development. I'm taken with the comment by Roy Searle that we're called to be co-creators of the future with God, rather than curators of the past for God. And all of this gives us some idea about the direction of travel. But I think my theme speaks to the tension that many of our churches will be facing. I mean, I pick up that there's a lot of shakiness around. You know, people are anxious. There are those in our churches that really want to push ahead. You know, they want to put this behind us and, you know, go into God's new future for us. But then there are many who are going to emerge from the pandemic. They're going to need time to process all that's happened. Many of them are going to need time to be healed. And I think that if we're to be attentive to rhythms of grace as a community of grace, then we will want to process all of this together. And the phrase that I'm using is move at the speed of love in our life together. I think that's vitally important that we do that. This is not the time for sort of going in different directions. We've got to find some way of moving together and recognizing that we're different. And the phrase, I mean, maybe Phil, it's easier said than done, but being attentive to rhythms of grace gives us that focus whereby it's not just on my desires, but it's on what we discern God is saying to us. I know we've heard it so many times, but you know, it's not my church, it's not our church. I mean, in one sense it is, but actually ultimately it's God's church, and you know, we need to be attentive to how we come out of this, because it's not going to be easy. And I think that phrase, certainly it works for me, that we need to walk at the speed of love in our life together is vital.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. We did a survey of our churches in NWBA, just trying to, back in April now, trying to get just a feel of what people had learned. And what was interesting was, in response to that question, you know, what have you learned through COVID? The overwhelming response was the importance of community, the importance of being the people of God. What I found interesting, if I can be honest, is that when we then asked people about, well, what do you see as the future? Many of them kind of still left that behind and saw, no, we need to get back to things. And I do wonder whether that's a message we all need to hear. You know, we need to put one another first, so to speak. And I suppose, I mean, one of the verses that's meant a lot to me, again, recently, is that from Romans 12, you know, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed. Because it does strike me that the narrative of our age is that we need to be in control. I always sort of feel that politicians or media people are always in a panic if they can't predict and control and tell us what's going to happen. And it seems to me that your theme kind of gives us permission to be the people God's called us to be, and simply respond to what God places before us.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting what you said about control, because you know, I'm one of those people that like to be in control. You know, I like to have things just right. I mean, I prepare very well, you know, but if there's one thing that the last year has taught me, it is that I am not in control. When I was in hospital, you know, I got this news. One day I was told that I would be going home, and then the next day I was told, no, you're not, because you need this specialist brace. But the other side of it was that I needed to have strict bed rest, which meant that I could not move, even within bed, even within the bed. So if I wanted to move within the bed, I needed to be helped to move within the bed, lest I do damage to my spine and my spinal column. So it meant that absolutely everything was done for me. So issues of control have been at the top of my mind, and I'm just particularly sensitive or aware of how we go to that, and we just, you know, very quickly seize onto that. It's interesting that as I've got better, you know, I've wanted to be more in control, you know, and I've found little areas of my life to control so that I can be the king of my castle. But I think this is true to an extent for all of us.
Geoff, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. There's a couple of questions I'd like to sort of finish with, if we could. I mean, one is just, is there a lasting message? I mean, perhaps you've already shared it in some of the things you've said, but is there a lasting message that you would want to leave us with as NWBA churches? And, hopefully we will get to meet you in the flesh at some point during your presidential year. And then secondly, how can we pray for you as you serve us as president in the rest of this year?
I'm still taken with the theme, and it seems that the theme of being attentive to rhythms of grace, it's something of a journey. One of the things that I'm encouraging folk to do is just to pray on a daily basis. Something like, gracious Lord, by your Spirit, turn my whole being to you, that I might live this day attentive to rhythms of grace. I mean, it's something that is a way of being rather than a project that we do. So there, in one sense, there aren't going to be, it's not something that we say, well, we've done that now. It's something that we do, and we do more and more. I mean, my desire is that this is something that that goes with me till the end of my life. And I guess if some other folk picked up on that, it's about noticing God in everything, and noticing grace in all that we do. So yeah, that's that.
And I mean, I sense that is an important message for us to grasp, because I guess many of us have, through the experience of lockdown, had more time to reflect. Yeah. And I guess there's a real danger now, as things begin to move towards normality, that we abandon that. So maybe there is just something for us all in that, to say, let's make sure we continue to take time to listen to the rhythms of grace. So how can we pray for you, Geoff?
Well, I think at this stage, I'm still not sure what the year is going to look like. I mean, I haven't got my diary all sorted out, and I'm going to need to be careful with the diary, because I'm not sure what my energy levels are going to be like. At the moment, I'm feeling pretty good, and but I've got to be cautious how much I take on. And I think one of the concerns initially was that one of the side effects of chemotherapy is that I have what's called neuropathy in my feet, which means that I have a sort of a deadness in the feel in them. Now, the great thing is I can actually drive safely, and but actually my mobility is affected seriously, so I am going to need to be walking with a stick, and I'm not going to be able to walk great distances. So it's just working out what that looks like, and that's all a bit of an unknown at the moment. So thank you.
Well, Geoff Colmer, President of the Baptist Union, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks, Phil. It's been great.